Hi, welcome to Michael's Musings on Music. This week I'd like to talk about the brass instruments of the orchestra. So, first of all, what defines the term brass instrument is oddly enough not because it's made of brass. For example, the saxophone is made of brass, but it's a woodwind instrument. It's about how they produce their sound, and they all produce their sound the same way. You place your lips firmly against a removable metal mouthpiece and buzz your lips into it. The buzzing causes the air column to vibrate inside the instrument. So if you were just to blow through a brass instrument, you won't get much more than the sound of air going through the instruments. You need to set the air column to vibrate, and you do that by buzzing your lips. And you change pitches by pressing down valves, which basically reroute the air in the instrument. Now, before valves were invented in the 19th century, you could only use the firmness of your lips to play different pitches. And you could only play a certain number of notes. The invention of valves meant you could play many more notes than previously possible. But it's not just the case that you press the valves down and the right note comes out automatically. You still need to vary the tension in your lips and use your ear to find the right notes. Let me start with the French horn. It's a very noble sounding instrument with a full, dark, round tone. And I'm not just saying that because my wife is a freelance professional horn player. The original horn was truly a horn. It was an animal horn, to be exact. Later, there was the hunting horn, which was a round instrument, so the hunter could put his arm through it to carry it around. The modern French horn has 3 valves to change pitches. And it's actually 2 separate horns that are combined so the player can switch between one and the other. Now, if you were to elongate the tubing inside a horn, it would stretch to about 18 feet. Now, the horn player also puts their hand where the horn flares out, which is called the bell. And the purpose of this is to produce a better and more in-tune note. So in the horn, you have 4 things that work together to affect the pitch. The valve combination, which valves you put down, the firmness of your lips, the amount of air you put in the instrument, and the position of your hand inside the bell. Now, in sheer sonic force, the trumpet is the strongest of all orchestral instruments. It's the highest pitch, the most agile of the brass instruments, so it's very well suited to play melodies. It's also the oldest brass instrument, around 3,000 years old. However, the valved trumpets, as we know them, were not invented until the early 19th century. Now, trumpets come in many different sizes. For example, some of the music of Bach requires a high-pitched trumpet called the piccolo trumpet. The trombone's basic design hasn't changed in 500 years. The trombone of the Renaissance, although it was then called a sackbut, plays surprisingly the same as the instrument we use today. Now, surprisingly, it was not used in the orchestral repertoire until quite late. The first notable instance, at least, is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, composed in the early part of the 19th century. Now, at first glance, it's easy to see how a trombone is different than the other brass instruments. It uses a slide. So let's imagine the slide pushed all the way in. This is called first position. And in this position, you can play a handful of notes with the lips alone. To play all the other notes, you have 7 different positions, with the 7th being the slide pulled out as far as it can go. The tuba is the lowest pitched of the brass family, but it can play relatively high, and it's quite agile as well. Now, unlike the other brass instruments, we know exactly when the tuba was invented, 1835. In fact, there's even a patent for it. Now, it takes an incredible amount of breath support to play the tuba. Just think of the size of it, and you have to continuously fill the instrument with air. It weighs almost 30 pounds. Now, if you look closely at a concert, you might have noticed the brass players in the back sort of taking their instruments apart and dumping out some liquid. Well, as you play a brass instrument, the moisture collects within the tubing. And if it's left to build up, it produces this sort of unwanted gurgling sound. So you have to pull out the various slides to empty it. But don't call it spit. The brass players like to call it condensation. Now, I want to talk about a typical brass setup that you might see at a concert. In the 18th century, the music of Mozart or Haydn, there's generally 2 horns, 2 trumpets, no trombones, and no tuba, because the tuba wasn't invented yet. A standard 19th century setup, so the music of Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Dvorak, is 4 horns now, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, and a tuba. Now the trombones in a symphony orchestra are 2 tenor trombones, trombone 1 and 2, and bass trombone, which is the 3rd trombone. The only real difference between a tenor trombone and a bass trombone is because of the way the bass trombone is constructed with a larger bore, it just sounds better in the lower registers. Now some 19th and 20th century pieces might have 6 horns or 8 horns, 4 trumpets, but almost always 3 trombones and a tuba. It's rare that you'll see more than 1 tuba or more than 3 trombones, but it does happen. So I finally want to talk a little bit about the issues of brass players as it relates to the conductor. Now the first issue is also a pet peeve of many brass players. They're constantly being told by conductors, it seems, that they're playing too loud. Now this reminds me of a story about a conductor named Sir Thomas Beecham, who was renowned for his witty comments at rehearsal. And at one point of the rehearsal, Beecham stops and says, "Second trumpet, you're too loud." "But maestro," says one of the brass players, "the second trumpet is not here yet." Beecham replies, "Well, when he gets here, tell him he's too loud." Now this is all perfectly logical because brass instruments are prized for their ability to play loud. They provide the power and the drama of a piece of music. And in their defense, it's hard for them to know exactly how loud they're playing because of where they sit. So it's up to the conductor to listen to the balance of the entire orchestra and make sure all the passages that need to be heard are heard. So sometimes you have to insist that the brass section play soft enough. Now the other skill brass players have to develop is not to come in too late. They have to anticipate the entries. And that's because there's a delay. They're sitting right at the back of the orchestra. And this is especially true, this delay, for a French horn, because think of it, the sound is coming out, the sound is going backwards, really. So it takes time to come out to the audience. So brass players will compensate by playing earlier than they actually want the sound to be heard. And as a conductor, you can help this too by showing them when to come in physically slightly earlier than you might show, let's say, the string section or even the woodwind section. You know, I tell you, talking about all the sections of the orchestra, the woodwinds, the brass, the strings, really makes me look forward to when we can all play together for you. So next week, let's talk about the percussion section of the orchestra. See you next time.